possible to scare them. If I told you there exists a demon that pursues people who think they're brave and takes on the most terrifying form possible to scare them, would you go looking for it? Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can follow me on Twitter at DarkPrevails, where I'm trying to find the creepypasta discussed in this episode's first story. Today I've got tons of demonic encounters for you to make you want to take a bath in holy water. Enjoy, and don't forget to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. Also, look for Unexplained Encounters on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you can leave us a review to help us reach more listeners. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Unexplained Creatures in the Middle East. From Anonymous. Mar Dazma. It's a monster that feeds on one thing: fear. I'm very happy to say that I personally have had no encounters with it, but the stories that you might hear about it are usually told by people who are not liars. Allow me to explain what it is, first with some history. I live in Iran, specifically the province of eastern Azerbaijan. If you look up what is called the Iranian Plateau, or the Iranian Cultural Continent, or Greater Iran, you'll find Iran and a bunch of her neighboring countries. In this area, different branches of Iranian languages are spoken, and with similar cultures comes similar mythology, and with that comes shared monsters. Originally, we believed in monsters called Deeves. They are creations of Ahriman, the devil. Deeves are a mortal enemy to the human race, like demons in Western culture. Imagine ghouls with the strength to lift a mountain, with claws and teeth like daggers, and impenetrable skin. If that's not overpowered enough, they're also said to be very smart, capable of using black magic to do things like taking different forms. There are famous Deeves, such as Cheshmak, who is responsible for earthquakes and hurricanes. Some appear in Shahnameh, the book of ancient Iranian legends, such as the White Deev, who imprisoned the Shah of Iran and was defeated by a warrior from Sistan. After the Muslim conquest and conversion to Islam, people kept their culture, but the Deeves were now called by an Islamic name: Jinn. Mar Dazma is a Deev. Of course, that means some might call it Jinn. The word Mar Dazma in Persian and other Iranian languages means man-tester or man-challenger. It may be pronounced a bit differently in various parts. Mar Dazma, Mart Azma, some might call it Javan Azma, meaning young tester or even jinn, but they all refer to the same thing: a Deev which can take different forms, even the forms of your loved ones. It can mimic the sounds of your loved ones, and do anything it can to draw you into graveyards or forests or dark alleys and dark corners at night. When it takes the form of an animal or human, it looks completely natural. It feeds on fear and, oddly enough, never attacks timid people. It likes to scare brave souls. That's why it is called Challenger. Mar Dazma uses various ways and tactics. Sometimes it takes the forms of innocent-looking farm animals, such as sheep, goats, or dogs, and approaches lone people in the dark. Then it suddenly speaks or changes forms. Sometimes it might approach a lonely traveler or stranger. Sometimes you hear someone that you know calling you, trying to draw you into the woods or dark caves or something of the sort. If you go in, though, it will scare you to death. You might have a heart attack. So yeah, it can kill people. There are times it might appear as a thin and skinny-looking creature, but as you want to investigate what it is exactly, it will start to rapidly grow taller and taller into a gigantic monster right from your nightmares. Maybe one night you're getting home late. A head comes out of a dark corner. Maybe the face looks like your neighbor. But as you want to say hello, the face begins to change. The more you look, the uglier and scarier it becomes, until either you look away and run or continue watching the show and die of sheer terror. The Challenger always invents new ways to scare people, and usually it doesn't want to kill you, it just wants you to be scared. But there is one thing that will make it angry. So angry, in fact, that it will not hesitate to tear you apart. Never tell Mar das Ma that you are not scared of it. Never challenge the Challenger. Some believe that if you become friends with a Mar das Ma, it can tell you the places of lost objects, or give you life advice, or tell you something from the future. But I wouldn't risk it. My apologies for the long introduction. Just keep in mind that Mar das Ma only challenges the brave. So if you're a scaredy cat like me, there's no need to worry. Here are the stories. The first two I heard from people that I trust, and the last one is a famous story told around here, so take it with a grain of salt. Number 1. The Floating Man. This story is from an old man in my village in eastern Azerbaijan, Iran. Our main product is apples. It happened in a trail around our village. During the day, it's gorgeous, but at night, it can be a very scary place. I will share the story from his point of view. I was younger, you see. Our watering schedule at the apple farm was set up so that each garden would have a few hours of water. My shift at the gardens began in the middle of the night, so I would have to wake up, pick up my shovel, then go to the gardens to water the apple trees. It was an hour-long walk, and it went right through the graveyard, then along through other people's gardens. I know what you're thinking, but no, it didn't happen in the graveyard. The night in question, I was able to pass through the graveyard without any trouble. I then entered the part of the path that was surrounded by trees. These trees formed a thick wall along the shoulders of the road. Here, all you can see are the stars above and the road, lit by the moonlight below you. I soon arrived at the spot where there are some big rocks on the ground. I was looking down to watch my steps, so that I didn't trip over one. It was then that I felt a presence above me. It was like I felt a shadow of fear lay over me. Hesitantly, I looked up. Between two of the trees, I saw this tall man floating above me. He had his hands completely open. Imagine someone floating in a pool with their front side and face in the water. And imagine you're under the water below them, sitting at the bottom, and they're staring right at you. That's what it was like. I was terrified when I saw his face. His eyes were big and wide open, almost popping out of their sockets. And his teeth, I wasn't sure if he was smiling or baring his teeth at me, or if he just didn't have lips at all. But I knew those teeth did not look natural for a human. I whimpered, "What are you?" And it spoke to me. "I am." But I didn't really want to stay there and hear what else it had to say. I quickly dropped my shovel and began to run with all the power I could summon in my legs. I'm not sure if it followed me or not, because I never did look back. I stopped only when I was back in the village on my doorstep. Even in the morning, I didn't dare go retrieve my shovel. I'm not sure what it was, and I was not going to stay there to hear the answer to my question. Number 2. The Sheep. This story was told to me by a friend of mine. It happened to his great uncle in their village in Luristan. This story will be told from his point of view. I was in my 20s. One late, dark evening, I was on my way home, casually passing through the empty alleys when I saw this sheep at a small dead end. It was too late for sheep to be outside, unaccompanied and awake, so I thought it was a runaway. As I was watching it, I got a clearer look at it. It was a beautiful and healthy sheep. It looked to be a good breed. and I was very tempted to take it home myself. I was young and strong, so I just lifted it up and put it on my shoulders, and I kept walking. After a couple of steps, I remembered to check if it was a male or female, so I felt over between its legs. Now, as I'm just about to find out, the sheep brings its mouth closer to my left ear, and I hear it speak to me.
You know, I'm way older than your grandfather.
Freaking out, I dropped the sheep, but when I looked back, it disappeared. It had just vanished like it was never there. When I arrived home, I told the story to my family, who said it was probably a jinn. Number 3. The story of Pahlavan Abbas. Pahlavan Abbas was a man in a small village named Tarmistan in Zagros Mountains. Pahlavan means champion because he was a wrestler, and Abbas was his name. Aside from wrestling, his main occupation was pottery. He had a student named Qasim who was going to learn his art. Qasim's father had passed away and he lived with his old mother. So Pahlavan Abbas had told Qasim that if there was any problem, he could ask him for help. One night there was a knocking at Pahlavan's door. It was Qasim saying, "Please hurry, Pahlavan. My mother is sick and I need your help to get her to a doctor." Now, Qasim seemed to be speaking with a different tone and accent than usual. But Pahlavan immediately got dressed and told Qasim to lead the way. After a while, it became clear that they were not on the right path to Qasim's house. Qasim was leading him outside of town. "Qasim, where are we going?" asked Pahlavan. Qasim just turned and smiled at him with yellow teeth. Weird, he thought. They climbed a hill and Qasim said, "We're here." "So where's your mom, Qasim?" As Qasim turned, Pahlavan saw that it wasn't Qasim at all. What he was now looking at was a hideous 3-meter-high creature with a humanoid body and the face of a dog. "What are you?" said Pahlavan. The creature replied,
I am Mardasma. Are you scared?
"No, a champion fears nothing," replied Pahlavan.
Well, then you must wrestle with me. If you lose, I will take your life,
said the creature. And so they wrestled, fighting for hours. And near the morning, Pahlavan managed to win. As the monster's back touched the ground, it turned into dust and smoke. With many bruises and a lot of pain, Pahlavan went back to the village, to the real Qasim, where he told the others what had happened to him before dying from exhaustion. This is an update to the original set of stories about Mardasma. Since writing that previous post, I spoke to a distant cousin of mine who recalled an adventure we had as kids, something I had forgotten about. Although this is technically one story, I think it would be best to break it into two. Number 4. Behind the Window. I was staying at my parents' house. They told me I could sleep in the room upstairs. That room was pretty big. It had a lot of stuff and junk in it, kind of like the old attics in movies. There was a window in there, maybe about 2 meters by 2 meters, with thick curtains, and right under it was my bed. From the very start, I got a bad feeling about that window, but I just shrugged it off. At about 9 p.m., it started. Bang! It was like a muscular man had punched the glass as hard as he could. It was even more terrifying because I couldn't see outside. The curtains were too thick. Quickly, I ran downstairs in a panic, telling my grandmother, "Oh, don't worry. We didn't hear anything. It probably was just some bird or bat attracted to the light of your room. Just turn the light off and go to bed, honey." So I did. Around midnight, though, I was awakened by, you guessed it, another bang. This time I was in the bed, so it was only inches from my face. I tried to calm myself down, to go back to sleep, but around 3 a.m. it came again, this time much harder. It felt as if something was hiding on the other side of that window, just about to break through and take me away. I couldn't see anything, and I was way too scared to open the curtain and peek outside. The pure silence was killing me now, not a single cricket or dog barking. Slowly, I crawled out of bed, quietly making my way downstairs to my grandparents'. All the while, I felt hunted by something. Once I got down there, I just slept on a blanket on the floor. It wasn't comfy at all, but at least it felt safe. The following night, I tried once again to sleep in that very same room in the very same bed. But the large window with the thick curtains never did have that haunting feeling again. I would even go on to sleep there many times throughout the years, and I never had any more supposed bats or birds banging on the window. Nowadays, I think it may have been Mar Desma trying to scare me. I don't think bats would all of a sudden feel like going kamikaze on me like that. Number 5. The Brog. This always gave me the goosebumps. Back when we were kids, Kay, my cousin, and I would play together, going on adventures, discovering things, and so on. One summer, we were entrusted with the responsibility to herd a dozen cattle. We would gather them in the morning, take them out into the fields, start a fire, and cook lunch as they ate. We would take them then to a river or somewhere with water to drink. Then we would take them back to the village in the evening. Now keep in mind, this happened in the exact same trail as the story, The Floating Man, that I told before. The night before, we had read a made-up story, a creepypasta if you will, about a monster called Brog, who haunted a road in another country. I've forgotten which country that was. Now, we knew it wasn't real, and even if it was in some other part of the world and could never get us. In this story, the Brog kind of looked like a werewolf. It was said that he would first feel hunted or stalked. Then suddenly all the birds in the area would flee away. You would then begin to hear footsteps behind you, and they would get closer as if they are walking inches behind you. Then you would hear the breathing. Not long after that, you would hear a massive, terrifying roar. By the time you turned around to see your stalker, you would see nothing more than a pair of red eyes, and the following morning, they would find your cold, dead body. Your skin turned black as coal, and that was when we got too spooked to read the rest. The next morning, we decided to make our way through, you guessed it, the trail. In the morning, it was truly beautiful. As the evening approached, it took a bit longer than we liked to gather our things and the cows. In the dark, we were walking along the trail with the cows in front of us. Now, at the time, we had not heard the story of the floating man, so we weren't scared at all of the trail ahead. But that was about to change. One by one, the signs of Brog started to come to life for us. First, that sudden and ominous feeling of being stalked. Second, the birds all around the valley suddenly getting spooked all at once and flying away. Third, the footsteps getting closer and closer to us. We tried to walk, not run, faster and faster. Suddenly, the bushes behind us began to make noises, as if something was running through them and shaking them. I said to my cousin, "Hey, why don't you take a look to see what's behind us?" "Dude, I'm as scared as you are. I'm not looking back," he said. We were sure that this was it, that we wouldn't see the light of tomorrow. But as we made it to the graveyard, suddenly things changed, as if something heavy was lifted from our hearts. We found the courage to look back. What was following us was just a dog, and it just turned back and ran into the wilderness. Later that night, we decided to read the rest of the Brog story. A certain part made our hearts churn in our chests. Brog can show itself as a dog. All these years later, I would shrug off the Brog adventure as us being kids. But now I think that something knew exactly and specifically what we were scared of, then presented itself in that way. There are other stories about that trail. I once heard someone say they saw something that would be best described as a mix between Yoda from Star Wars and a monkey, along that same trail at night. I found a big similarity in all of them. The graveyard is safe, and the Mar Dazma will not follow you there. My cousin believes that may be because there are good people buried there. Demonic Creature Encounter from Schaefer 9RX. This did not happen to me. It happened to my younger brother a few years ago, in 2020. To begin, I come from a very large family. My mother and a couple of my siblings have had very strange encounters with the paranormal, specifically a demonic presence. Personally, I've never had anything crazy happen to me. The odd things that have happened to me I can easily rationalize. It's important to note that my family and I are Christian. We believe the spiritual realm is real, and it sometimes allows itself to be seen by people at certain times. You may find this interesting, but I believe there is a difference between fallen angels and demons. Genesis 6 and the Book of Enoch give detailed and interesting depictions and origin stories, beginning with when Satan fell from heaven and took a third of the angels with him, going on to create Nephilim through mankind. I believe demons are the spirits of the Nephilim because their souls are half angelic beings and half man. They must roam the earth until their appointed judgment from God. At times, demons can manifest themselves in many different ways, often for the purpose of influence. However, that is a whole other conversation and story of its own. Here is my brother's experience. This encounter took place across the street from where we live. My family and I live in the woods, way out in the country on the far outskirts of a small town in rural southwest Michigan. My brother used to do yard work and odd jobs for our neighbors across the street. One day in the late afternoon, my brother was doing some cleaning on our neighbor's pool. Our neighbor's pool is directly behind their house, and it's surrounded by forest. Encompassing the pool, except where it connects to the house, is about a 4 to 5 foot embankment. My brother was diligently working when he noticed something very strange. It was the middle of the summer. The sun was setting, and the forest was alive with birds, insects, and spring peepers, creating that beautiful summer melody. All of a sudden, everything abruptly went silent, like someone turned off a switch, shutting off all the noise. My brother said it felt so quiet that his ears began to ring. Being frightened by this sudden change in the atmosphere, he stopped working and began to look around, trying to make sense of it all. That's when he saw it. My brother turned and looked towards the far end of the pool, and standing on the other side of the embankment was this creature staring at him. My brother said it was not much more than 20 feet from him. Upon seeing this creature, my brother panicked so hard he fell backward to the ground. He began to crawl for cover. He then picked himself up and ran home as fast as he could and hid in his room. I recall arriving home shortly after the encounter. My mother told me, "You need to check on your brother. He doesn't seem to be doing too well." I did as she said. I found my brother in his bed, and I asked if he was okay. That's when he told me this story. He then described the creature he saw. He said the creature was dark gray in color, and the most memorable attribute was its large, piercing yellow eyes. My brother didn't get every detail of the creature because he didn't waste any time hightailing it out of there. He said the thing must have stood 8 or 9 feet tall because it was almost eye level with him, despite it standing on the other side of the 4-foot embankment. My brother went on, saying the facial features of it were animalistic, but also somehow resembled a man. The countenance of the thing can best be described as demonic. I believe my brother's encounter to be very real. His actions speak far louder than his words. When he told me this story, I could tell that his heart began to race, and he became visibly afraid. My brother is a very straightforward, no bullcrap kind of guy. He's also generally very skeptical, especially when it comes to the paranormal and when hearing about my mother and other siblings' experiences. For him to just tell a story like this, it goes way against his nature and character. My brother struggled to sleep after this encounter and suffered from severe nightmares, which would continue on for a few weeks. One night, my brother woke up out of a dead sleep in a panic. He had heard deep growling coming from his closet. I checked the closet for him, and of course there was nothing there. But I prayed over him, and I tried to comfort him as best I could. The day after the encounter, my brother acted very paranoid. He went back to the neighbor's house with a rifle, grabbed his tools, and never worked over there again. I don't know why my brother encountered this being, but after his experience, we had some horrible family tragedies take place. My brother told me his beliefs and perception of reality have forever been changed due to this experience. Watchers in the Park, from Up North Goon. This happened about 10 years ago in my hometown in northern Michigan. It stands as one of my few unexplainable encounters in life. I grew up in a small town, spent time in the Upper Peninsula my whole childhood, and I'm very familiar with many of the ghost stories in Michigan. But it never occurred to me that I would ever experience anything significant in my life. You see, I didn't really believe in ghosts, but I did enjoy the stories. I had few friends as I was a weird kid, so the few I had were very special to me. My childhood best friend, Jay, moved to my town in 1st grade, and we quickly made off as good friends. We played on the playground together, messed around in class to annoy the teacher together. We were basically inseparable. Fast forward to the end of 4th grade, Jay's family moved to Kansas, which naturally upset me. But he would come to visit his grandparents who lived in town every summer after that. The summer of my 7th grade year, he would continue to come visit his grandparents. He did the very same that summer. So, come June, I went to visit for the first week of my summer vacation. His grandparents lived on the south end of town, a block behind the only other traffic light we had. Just across the road from them was the town park, and next to that, of course, was the cemetery. The park was decent-sized with a long driveway and decent-sized dirt parking lot. At the back edge of the lot, there's a hill that leads down to the 2 baseball diamonds, and to the right of the lot was the play area and public bathrooms. A chain-link fence separated the park from the cemetery. There were only 2 lights on at the park at night, one at the bathrooms and one in the parking lot. On the first night staying at Jay's grandparents', it was like any other summer. We were very excited to see each other. Dinner was on the stove, dessert in the oven. We were just enjoying our evening. Usually, we like to play in the park, set up baseball games, mess around in the woods directly behind the fields. At night, we would go over to the playground side and tell ghost stories, since after the air cooled down at night, a thick fog would roll off the cemetery and make things creepy. It really set the stage for these stories. That night would be no different. Around 1 a.m., we set out for the park. As usual, the fog started rolling over the playground, and it was rather quiet, and it was a bit chilly heading into the park. Me, Jay, and his older brother E got halfway down the driveway when E noticed his older sisters on the back end of the baseball fields. He said, "Hey, let's go scare the girls." He started to walk over that way, but then we saw him stop dead in his tracks. He glanced over into the tall grass field next to the driveway. I stopped too, watching E. His face went pale, as if he had just seen a ghost. That worried me. E did not scare easily. When I followed his gaze, I saw what he was looking at, and apparently so did Jay. By then, all of us had frozen in fear. In the middle of the field, standing about 7 feet tall, were these 3 shadowy figures. Looking closer at them, I noticed they weren't simply shadowy. They were just big shadows. They stood in the field, looking at Jay and Dee's sisters and their friends. They appeared to be wearing long trench coats with brimmed hats, but they were darker than the night itself. E snapped out of the daze and shakily said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" They didn't answer, of course, so he spoke louder. "Hey, what are you doing?" At this point, I was terrified, and after E had yelled that last time, those 3 figures turned their attention to us. Whatever in the world they were, they definitely weren't human, and they did not look nice either. When they turned, it was the most unnatural-looking thing I'd ever seen, and their eyes looked straight through our souls. Beady small yellow dots on an otherwise blank face. E screamed as loud as he could at his sisters to run, then turned, grabbing me and Jay. Together, we sprinted back to the house, hiding in the living room the rest of the night, not sleeping at all. Once the sun came up, we decided we'd go over to the park and check the field for footprints or any clues as to what we saw the night before. Once we were over there, we found large, flattened spots in the grass, but no tracks leading out to it. The spot was just big enough to hold those 3 figures. To this day, I have no good explanation for it all. That park isn't even known to be haunted, but I've never been back there at night ever since. Warning. The following story contains violence against pets. Something killed my dogs. From Gray. I share these stories as I've gotten over the terror they've given me. I'm sure they can give you a nice scare. My first story starts with a warning. Please be careful who your family dates. My older brother used to date a woman who had warned that her family was cursed. I didn't really care what she said, but strange things began to happen when she moved in with us. My cousin and I used to play outside after dark with my little brothers, playing hide and seek. I would soon start getting these creepy feelings, like I was being watched and judged. I listened to my gut feelings, and I began to watch my little brothers and cousins more closely. On one occasion, I noticed a strange dog was watching them as they played. Now, my family has quite a few dogs, 5 at the time. 2 pit bull hybrids, 1 albino, the other brown, a German shepherd, a mixed sheepdog, and finally a dog I didn't know the breed of, but it looked like the other 2 pit hybrids we had. It was colored a mix of brown and black. However, the dog I saw watching us was a mass of fur and colored a dark brownish color. Its jaw had this overbite. I could see ribs on it, and its back legs looked wrong, like they mismatched. I should mention here that I am Native American. My tribe says if a skinwalker shapeshifts into something, sometimes a part of it comes out wrong. After seeing this dog, I got everyone to go back inside. We would not be playing after dark for as long as I had that feeling. If the feeling went away by the next day, I was going to let my little brothers and cousins play. That night, our dogs got into a fight with something. I listened to them fight it all night. The dogs were vicious. After the fight, I waited until the sun was up. I went right out to investigate. The whole yard was a mess. I could see where the fight started and where it went. The sand and bushes where the fight started looked like a dog fight. But as I followed where it progressed, I started to see whatever my dogs were fighting getting bigger and bigger. The aftermath of where the fight ended, it looked like a horse and another horse had fought. The bushes were uprooted, and there was a hole about 5 inches deep and 7 feet wide. I got pale, and I ran to check on my dogs. My dogs only had some scratches and bruises. This is where it gets creepy. 3 to 4 months after this, the 2 pits died from fighting some cougar, a cougar that decided to come up to our house. The dog that looked like a pit had to be put down too. It had gotten attacked by a porcupine, and the quills went too deep into the dog's face. The German Shepherd got hit by a car and broke both back legs. My family and I tried to nurse it back to health. We even made some splits and wrapped both legs. Sadly, its legs still got infected, and she passed away. Our sheepdog disappeared, and we later found it dead. It had choked on something it was eating a good 130 yards away from my house. They all fought that skinwalker, and later died in odd ways. My older brother and I buried the dogs where we bury our pets. We placed stones on them to prevent scavengers from digging them up. As we were walking back from burying the last dog, something weird happened to me. I got really tired all of a sudden, and my vision began to go black. I let my brother know what was going on, and he made me sit down in the direction of the dog's graveyard. My vision went black, like I was blind, and I couldn't see at all. My other senses were fine, but my vision was affected. As I waited with my brother, I swear I could hear the dogs we buried barking loudly. As I listened to the dogs, my vision returned to me. We then walked back to the house together. As time passed, my vision deteriorated. I now wear glasses, but I'm glad everything's all over. That thing, whatever it was, I believe it took part of my vision, and it took our dogs. But it did not take my family. I would do anything to protect my family. A warning to you all, keep good and strong dogs if you live near skinwalkers. And know a good medicine man if you can. Bad Ouija board experience. From Jack. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, I was in primary 7 in school. It was a tradition that all the pupils go to Edinburgh for an end-of-year trip. I had only joined the school about a year prior, and I found it hard to make friends as everyone else had already been friends for years. So I would spend my break time and lunchtime on my own. The teachers who were organizing the trip noticed this. They decided to put me into a room with 6 other boys, probably hoping that I would bond with them. One of the days we were there, we went to a place called the Edinburgh Dungeons. It was basically like a ghost train, but without the train. It was pretty cool. At the end of it, there was a gift shop, and they had this basket of wrapped up items behind the counter that were only £1. We didn't know what was inside it, but everyone was lining up to get a gift since £1 was such a deal. On the way back to where we were staying, everyone was opening them up, and we all soon realized what we had purchased. A do-it-yourself Ouija board kit. It had candles, essential oils, a spell to summon spirits, and directions on how to use everything. On the last night, I had the idea to make the Ouija board. Only 2 of the boys were up for it, though. The rest were too scared and superstitious, despite acting like they were brave. We went and got what we needed to make our Ouija board, and we began to play. We moved the glass a few times, pretending we didn't do it, but after about 15 minutes, we were almost ready to call it a night, when the glass moved again. This time, we all swore that we hadn't done it. Being young and stupid, we didn't believe each other, as we accused one another of moving the glass. I said we should try it each on our own, just to prove it. I was the second person to have only my fingers on the glass. I felt it move on its own, I swear I did. Some other force was moving it. It felt very strange. After we all confirmed that it was none of us pushing the glass, we all put our fingers back on together. One of my friends began to ask questions, such as, "Who are you?" and "How did you die?" The spirit told us that he and many other spirits heard us calling out to them. At this point, we were all getting very freaked out, so we decided to stop playing. Around an hour had gone by since we stopped playing with the Ouija board. Everyone in the room had gone to sleep, except for me. I began to hear strange noises around the room, and I thought I kept seeing strange, shadowy figures in the corner of the room. I didn't want to stay there, so I went next door into the girls' room, as they were all still awake, and I sat with them. I still don't believe it. From Anonymous. I was maybe 12 years old when I saw it. We had just moved to a new town. I was happy, being able to make new friends and all. I remember sitting at the park, only half a block from my home. It was a bright day, not a cloud in the sky. I was shocked when a kid came up to me. I'd only lived here a few days at that point. The kid's name was Joe. Joe was tall, maybe the age of 16. I asked him what was up, but he just smiled at me. I thought that was weird until he finally spoke. "Do you know what happened in your house?" I felt uncomfortable then, but I shook my head to answer. He smiled again. "Just don't try to be brave." He left after that. I asked around at school about him and the house I was at. Turns out there is a legend, so to speak, that the house I live in was used by a man who summoned a supposed monster. I told my parents, but they laughed and said I was just being silly. I made up my mind that day. I wish I hadn't. That night I decided to climb into the attic. The attic was dark and smelled of death, and dust filled my nose. I turned on the flashlight that I'd brought with me. I scanned the room, but I didn't find anything out of the ordinary. I'd been looking for signs of this man who summoned a monster. I felt rather relieved, having not found anything. I was thinking all of this was just silly. Still, I wanted to know what else was up here. I began to move things around, pushing items aside. I wish I'd just left. A soft hissing sound came from behind me. I thought that one of our cats, which we had two of, had climbed up after me. Still, I felt uneasy. I sighed and told the cat to go back downstairs. In return, I heard a deep laugh, unlike anything that might come from a human. I felt my heart sink for a few moments. I was shaking, too scared then to move, to make a sound. I got the feeling that something wanted me out of there. My breath caught on my throat. A hard, cold hand grabbed onto my shoulder. I wanted to scream, but no sound would leave my lips. A voice, something that sounded more akin to a vampire than a person, spoke in my ear. "You don't belong here." I somehow managed to speak, but all I could whimper was, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "Leave now." Whatever it was threw me down from the attic. I missed the stand I'd used to climb up, landing instead on the floor. Thankfully, it wasn't that much of a fall. I looked up and I saw something looking down at me. Something with a head that had a sickly gray color to it, eyes cold and full of hate, teeth a sickening yellow, all of this just peeking out from the lip of the attic entrance. In some places, there was no skin, just bone. Thin black hair hung from the top of its head. I shook uncontrollably looking at it. This thing looked like it was right out of a horror show. I ran to my room, and I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat up in my bed all night, rocking back and forth, sitting close to my nightlight. I was too scared to move much more than that. After morning came, I busied myself downstairs, not wanting to be on the second floor, not wanting to be near the attic. I told my parents, but they got mad at me that I went up there alone, not believing my story at all. For the next 2 days, I barely slept at all. Finally, when I did fall asleep, I was awakened by that voice.
I told you, you don't belong.
I froze, slowly opening my eyes. Eventually, I got out of bed to peer out of my room. I could see the attic door open. Something was hanging out of it, a claw-like hand, holding a bloody, dripping bird. I don't recall much after that. I must have screamed or fainted. When I woke up, I was on the couch downstairs. We ended up moving my room downstairs too. And I never told anyone else about this beyond my parents, until now. My experience owning a demonic doll. From Anonymous. Over the summer, I came into contact with a very nice lady online named Mary. Mary had a very interesting item up for sale, a doll that was supposedly very haunted. I asked about it, and she gave me all the details on it. I was very curious about it still, and also very skeptical. I asked if she knew the original owner. She did, and the original owner's name was apparently Michael. Through her, I was able to contact Michael and have a conversation on Charlie. I'd like to share the doll's story and my own personal experiences with owning a demonic doll. When the original owner, Michael, was 3, his parents began to foster children, and usually they'd keep them for 6 months until they found them a good home. But on Michael's 9th birthday, his parents decided to foster Charlie. This was Michael's 9th birthday present. Charlie had AML, which stands for acute myeloid leukemia. Because of this, he was very sick. Michael hated Charlie. He saw Charlie as the reason he didn't get anything else for his birthday. With Charlie having AML, he was not cheap to take care of, and a lot of money had to come out of Michael's parents' pockets in order to keep Charlie healthy. AML affects the bone marrow and white blood cells. It's a form of cancer and affects about 200,000 people every year. The life expectancy of someone with AML is 2 to 5 years, sometimes longer with treatment. It can be quite painful, causing pain in the bones and extreme back and leg pain. Again, Michael didn't dislike Charlie, he hated him. Michael always said there was something wrong with Charlie. Charlie loved attention. He loved seeing Michael get teed off. Seeing Michael get ignored by his family made Charlie happy. Michael said he always thought Charlie was evil, but no one saw through his charade. They simply thought of him as a poor, sick boy. Weirdly enough, whenever Michael came down with an illness, Charlie seemed to be more energetic and feeling better. And as Charlie stayed with them, Michael seemed to get more and more sick more frequently. When Michael was feeling good and getting attention from his parents, suddenly Charlie would have a flare-up and need attention all day. Other strange things would happen as well. During the time Charlie was with them, they tried buying pets for him. But all of his pets would soon mysteriously die. Charlie never seemed to care about his pets dying. He also didn't care about his AML. According to Michael, Charlie behaved as if his disease was more of a nuisance. Well, something strange did happen. Michael woke up one morning, feeling a dark energy. He asked Charlie if he could feel it too, but Charlie said no. It was around then that Michael said that he knew when Charlie was going to die. During Charlie's final months, Charlie began to act happier. During his flare-ups, he would get excited and have energy that he shouldn't have. Everyone put it off as a delusion from his weakened blood flow. The day Charlie died, he and Michael had a talk. He referred to it as the talk because it was the last private conversation he and Charlie had. The day he died, he said everything felt off before it happened. Michael knew it was going to happen, and so did Charlie. They discussed if he was scared of dying. They discussed their beliefs about the afterlife, and about what Charlie was going to do when he was on the other side. As the conversation came to a close, he told Michael not to worry, stating that he would be back in a few days. Michael was very confused. Later that night, Charlie became very ill. There were doctors rushing in and out with medical equipment. They decided he should pass in his home peacefully. A few hours later, Charlie was gone. After Charlie's passing, Michael said it was like a cloud had cleared and the sun had finally risen. The dark energy that surrounded the house was gone. One night, Michael felt that dark energy again. He followed the sensation to Charlie's room. This had become a sort of storage area now. He said he could feel evil coming from the room. He opened the door and walked in. He went to the shelf of porcelain dolls his mom had collected. He picked up a doll and swears he heard something. "Told you I'd be back." It was Charlie's voice. Michael was shocked, throwing the doll across the room. He blacked out then, having terrible dreams until he woke up. After that, he asked if he could go stay with his aunt and uncle for the rest of the summer. He believes that Charlie chose this doll as a vessel because it always creeped Michael out. He'd always been scared of the doll, and Charlie knew it. In fact, Charlie would always sneak it into his room at night, or he would tell Michael all about the doll and how it talked to him and moved around the room on its own. This is what led him to believe this is why Charlie would choose the doll. Years later, Michael's mother passed away, leaving him in possession of 3 of her dolls. All the foster kids received 3 porcelain dolls. It just so happened Michael received Charlie as one of the dolls. Nothing happened until a week later. Michael began to have the terrible dreams and began to feel drained. He got sick, and no matter what he did, he wouldn't get better. No matter how much sleep he got, he would still feel tired. That was when he decided that Charlie needed a new home, and eventually, Charlie came into my possession. Michael sold the doll to a collector who gladly took Charlie in. The collector began to experience the same exact things and decided she had taken on too much and had the doll relocated. I soon came across Charlie while scrolling through eBay one night. I decided to message the owner. She tried to convince me not to buy it and explained what I was getting myself into. I didn't believe a word of it, so without hesitation, I purchased Charlie. A week later, I received him. If I could go back in time and undo this, I would in a heartbeat. The moment I opened that box, I felt it. It's hard to explain, but I could feel a change in the air. I picked up the doll and got chills immediately. I put it off as a coincidence, and I brought Charlie into my room. Setting it up, I told it that it was just a stupid doll. How could it possibly be evil? I had to go to work then, so I closed my door and left. When I got home later that night, I walked in and I could feel it. That weird feeling again. I brushed it away once more as a coincidence. I walked into my room and found Charlie still there, but that feeling was still in the air. The energy it gave off was so powerful. I got in the shower, then I went to bed. That night I had horrible dreams. I would be somewhere peaceful with family or friends, and all of a sudden, they would go away, and this thing would chase me up and down, ripping me apart. I call it thing because no words could describe it. I've never seen anything like it before, and I hope I never do again. Other weird things began happening as well. Lights would flicker or die. Phones would die all of a sudden. My TV and game consoles all of a sudden didn't work anymore. Finally, after 3 weeks of hell, I had enough. I was dead set on getting Charlie a permanent home away from mine. I did research and found a place to keep Charlie out of harm's way. In my time with Charlie, I can tell you there are some things none of us can explain in this world. I can tell you that demonic and possessed items are not something you ever want to mess with, and they're very real. Whatever Charlie was, I can tell you he sure as heck wasn't normal. And I kind of believe Michael now when he said that he didn't think Charlie was human. I just hope whatever or whoever Charlie is finds peace at last. Thank you for listening to another unsettling episode of Unexplained Encounters. You can send us your story to have it narrated on the show at darkstories.org. Unexplained Encounters is an EerieCast original series. You can find other horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com, such as Redwood Bureau, a fictional anthology series, Freaky Folklore, a documentary-style series about myths and cryptids around the world, Destination Terror, a show about the most haunted places, and Tales from the Break Room, another show I host all about the scary things that happen to people at work. Again, that's EerieCast.com. By the way, if you want fewer annoying ads and you want to support what we do, consider going to EerieCast.com/plus to sign up for EerieCast Plus. That unlocks all our podcasts with all but host-read ads removed. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. Tales from the Break Room is a scary story podcast made up of viewer-submitted stories. If you want your scariest work experiences featured on Tales from the Break Room, send your story to us at darkstories.org if you don't want to be paid for it. Otherwise, send your story to us at EerieCast.com/submit, only if you have a working PayPal account.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Hey there. Welcome back to the break room. I've been obsessed with our new fish-flavored croissants lately, but I swear I found a scale on my nose the other day. So I think maybe avoid that menu item unless you want to end up a mermaid. Ah yes, of course, I do have some new scary and allegedly true work-related stories for you. These stories feature some very scary folks invading people's workplaces, as well as a very haunted shift where the dead simply don't stay dead. Enjoy these tales from the break room. Protection with a Pizza Pan, from Shiny. I have an art degree, and having such comes with great difficulty of finding jobs that relate to it. I moved from my small town to a bigger city that has a theme park. I felt like that was close enough to my love of art and entertainment. I worked as the painter, but I was also learning and working with the creative department. I met a lot of cool people and loved my new coworkers. Despite the lack of management, communication, and some creepy employees from different departments, I enjoyed my time there. The park was really a concert hall, theme park, water park, and zoo all in one. It was so big that there could be 100 people working that day, but depending on where you were, you could be all alone. I was the only painter, and I was used to putting on my headphones and going off to a different part of the park each day and starting my painting. On that day in particular, I was working in the water park, and I was already having a rough day dealing with finances when I got a call from my coworker. "Hey, what's up?" I asked. hoping to hear him say something stupid to help cheer me up and make me laugh. But I was wrong. "You need to find somewhere to hide." At those words, my heart dropped. I dropped everything I was doing and ran to the nearest building. When something like that happens, you stop thinking and your instincts kick in. Not all my actions in that moment made sense, but all I knew was that my body just moved. "What's going on?" I asked as I ran. "Some guy is running from the cops. He's in the park. He's heading to the water park now." It felt as if my heart had stopped. I was a woman, alone in the water park area. I locked myself in a restaurant nearby with windowed doors. "I'm locking the doors. My hands won't stop shaking." It's okay, you'll be fine. Just breathe." All right, it's locked," I answered, finally hearing the lock click. "Is he armed?" I asked. "We don't know." I fell silent. The unknown is truly a terrifying thing. "Be safe. We'll keep you updated." He hung up. I was all alone then, with no radio and my phone at 15%. Eventually, my mind caught up and it hit me. A kitchen has knives. I looked around all over, but to my defeat, I found nothing. I'd left my hammer and my paint bucket too. But I did have my pocket knife, even if it could only do so much. Then I found a pizza pan. You know, the ones that are used to take the pizza in and out of the oven. I sighed, accepting the fact that if something happened, I would have to fight. I sat in the corner of the back room, letting my husband know what was going on and that my phone was on low battery. I sat there in silence for what felt like ages. I slowed my breathing and prepared myself for the worst. After a long time of silence and my mind going through scenarios, I heard a noise at the door. My mind once again stopped as I heard the door open. I was numb as I stood with the sharp edge of the pan ready to slice at anything. I heard a voice, but I didn't process it. I was ready, footsteps getting closer and closer. Finally, a person came into view and I raised my weapon to strike. The police officer looked at me and I just lost it. My built-up anxiety finally overflowed and I let it all out as I was led away from the building. They had dogs out looking for the intruder. I was taken to one of the outside picnic tables, where another officer told me that I need to announce myself and answer them if that happens again, or else they could have sent the dog out after me. I understood where they were coming from, but in that moment of fear, fight took over, and all my other senses shut down. After a few more minutes of waiting, they finally found him. He had been hiding in the building right next to mine. He was armed, too, an escaped convict. Even though the worst thing that could have happened didn't happen, I dealt with temporary PTSD. I wouldn't go back to the water park for another week or two. I also didn't like being in big places, like Walmart. I was constantly paranoid as I marked out exits and potential weapons I could use. I constantly thought about what-ifs. Thankfully, with therapy, I worked through it. I quit that job months later due to a mix of issues. I do miss my coworkers and some of the animals, but it's still always in the back of my mind. What can I use to fight? You get used to it. From Mike V. I worked as a security guard at one of the local hospitals, and despite what I'm going to tell you, it's a pretty good place to work. Hours are plentiful, pay is good, and the nurses are downright sweet. That being said, it is still a hospital, and as such comes with its own bad things. I confess, and forgive me if I come across as a little morbid, I've been in the presence of more death in the first 6 months on the job than the previous 30 years of my life. But that's not what this is about. This story is about the hospital basement. Now, I had initially been hired to work a specific area of the hospital. I had daytime hours, but when a full-time evening shift opened up, I went for it. Gotta make that extra money, which meant I had free range to patrol the whole property. One of the areas I had to patrol was the basement, which, contrary to what you might think, is a pretty busy part of the building. X-ray department, custodian, engineering, food prep, those are just some of the many departments that fill this basement, so it's not exactly a spooky dark place like you might imagine. However, once 8 p.m. hits and the vast majority of employees have gone home, that basement gets very quiet, and that's when the incidents began. It was my first week as patrol officer, and so far had been rather uneventful, which I was fine with as a 5-year veteran of private security in other areas. I was kind of hoping for less action for a while. One night I was making my rounds in the basement when I began to hear footsteps. Normally this is no big deal, but it was late, so it caught my attention right away. Now I figured it was maybe a nurse who had to grab something or a visitor who took a hilariously big wrong turn, so I wandered over in that direction. As I approached the corner, I checked the wall mirror. For those of you who don't know, hospitals have ball-shaped mirrors to allow staff to check around corners, thus preventing any gurney fender benders. But I saw nothing. No people, no shadows, no movement of any kind. I rounded the corner to make sure, and it was an empty hallway. Only place they could have turned into were the elevators, and I would have heard the ding from them if someone had entered. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. Probably my brain messing with me. A similar incident happened a few days later. While checking to make sure that engineering didn't leave their equipment in plain sight, again, I suddenly heard voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was for sure human voices. I went to check out of curiosity more than anything else. But no matter where I walked, the voices always seemed distant. I didn't see anyone, and I must have walked the entire basement, but the voices always sounded distant. Then suddenly, it went quiet, just like that, as if they'd left the area. How very strange, but again, I chalked it up to nothing unusual. Maybe some custodian had left a radio or podcast on or something. In my mind, it was all so easily explained and no big deal. While that could be explained easily enough, this next one was unnerving because I can't explain it to this very day. It was another day, another basement patrol, and I was walking down a large stretch of hallway when, in front of me, I noticed a set of doors close. These are the fire doors that held open magnetically. They're automatically closed upon the fire alarm going off, which incidentally had happened earlier that day, a false alarm in case you're wondering. Clearly, these two had not been pushed open after the all clear, so I walked over towards them to do the job. Then, one of them opened up. Not swung open aggressively, but just casually opened, like someone was just passing through. This caused me to stop in my tracks in shock. These doors are pretty heavy, so nobody could have just yanked it open and ducked out of sight. This door was pushed to the wall in one smooth motion, not shoved or slightly opened. Unless there was a very specifically located hurricane in that spot, those doors were not hit by a sudden draft. Not one strong enough to open a fire door all the way. Needless to say, I decided to patrol the more populated areas that night. There was also the cold spots. So many cold spots in that basement. This wasn't wind or air conditioning, these were specific moments of cold that randomly disappeared shortly afterwards. These weren't normal, they were everywhere. Not just the same spots every time. Different spots. Spots where it should have been warm, such as by the food prep kitchen or near the CT scan room. It really made no sense. A few weeks of all these things and I was just doing my best to ignore it. The job paid well, and I didn't want to abandon ship just like that. But that nearly changed one evening. Another basement patrol. Woohoo, sadly I can't skip it or say I did when I didn't because the higher-ups, they would have known. So I was back again late at night in the creepy empty basement, telling myself that my car will be paid off a lot faster with this salary. I was approaching the corner from the first incident and checked the wall mirror on instinct, and I froze. A figure stood just around the corner. Not a person, but a human-shaped black mass. It was just standing there around the corner. I was horrified at that point, My mind already on high alert, now it was on red alert. I tried to reason with myself. It's just a smudge on the mirror. No, it couldn't be that. They clean those daily. I was horrified, shaken up. I was wishing I had a fellow guard with me. But what good would that really do, honestly? I was praying to God, Odin, Ra, freaking Santa Claus if I had to, that this thing didn't decide to move towards me. I stood there for what seemed like an eternity when that thing finally walks the opposite direction of me. Defying all sense of reason, I decided to poke my head around the corner to try to get a look at this thing. But by then, it was gone. Disappeared. I looked up at the mirror, and it was clear as well. Just me in this basement. I scrambled up the stairs at a sprint and spent the remainder of the shift around the nurse's station, expecting very little sleep that night when I got home. A couple of months later, and short of the aforementioned cold spots, things had calmed down. I was working an earlier shift one day, down in the basement with a coworker doing the rounds, when I heard the sound of voices. Now, admittedly, at that time of day, it could have been anyone, but I was still quite paranoid about this basement, so my mind instantly went to the worst possible scenario. I stopped then to turn to my coworker, asking in a freaked-out sounding way if they could hear those voices. To my relief, they said yes. I calmed down a bit, then my coworker replied, "You get used to it." And I instantly stopped and stared at them. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Voices, weird noises and all that crap. Work here long enough and you get used to it, especially in this area. I assumed you saw or heard something, judging by how you looked like a deer in headlights just now." I told them about my experiences, and they said, "Yeah, most of us all have had similar incidents when patrolling this area. Don't worry about it. You'll learn to shrug it off." I feel I should add quickly that this coworker is older and has been with the company for about 15 years, which to me explained how they were so casual and nonchalant about it while I was losing my crap. "Why this area?" I asked. "Never anywhere else." "Do you really have to ask?" They laughed. Then it hit me, and I almost kicked myself for not figuring it out. The shadow figure, the footsteps, the voices, the door, even the majority of the cold spots, they all happened within a close proximity of the morgue. I'd been given a tour of the facility when I started, but seeing as I was assigned a specific post when I began, I kinda just forgot about the morgue and its location. "Why wasn't I told at the start?" I asked. "Because you wouldn't have believed us. Admit it," they responded. I admit they were right. Had they mentioned it on day one, I would have laughed it off as either messing with the new guy or just silly stories, so I can't blame them. I worked at that hospital for a year before being transferred to a different site. Still a hospital, but this one doesn't have an ER, ICU, or a morgue, so I feel better. The coworkers are great, job still pays well, and I genuinely like being here. But still, I double-check those mirrors when I approach any corner, and I still jump at any sound when I'm alone at night on the job. I hope against hope that eventually I'll get used to it. Jim, from Jeremy A.H. I worked as an IT technician at a small hospital in southwestern Pennsylvania. My shifts varied from week to week, but I found myself working the night shift more often than not due to staffing. At the time, our crew had a few openings, so only one technician worked the overnight shift. This didn't really matter that much as work slowed to a crawl after the bulk of nursing staff left at 8. I grew accustomed to the boring mediocrity of the work, preparing for the morning shift and rounding the dark halls of the hospital wings. Most nights, I would only see a few dimly lit computer screens sitting in front of even more dimly lit faces of personnel, waiting for their shifts to end. Occasionally, I found myself running into the lone night security guard who patrolled the same areas. The requirements of the shift's round were simple enough. Check all the computers and ensure staff had no issues. But there was one task in particular that wasn't so simple. An end-of-night task given to ensure the equipment in the upstairs storage area was restocked. Each night shift technician would be required to go to the basement storage, located in the old side of the hospital. The old building stood in stark contrast to the new renovations, with rebuilt flooring and rooms in each of the updated hospital wings. The halls, already poorly lit due to the energy-saving standards and patient requests at night, seemed to grow longer and darker as the flooring changed from the new wood floors to the cold, hard tiles used in the past. They reminded me of mental institutions in movies, the white speckled pattern only stopping due to cracks and some broken pieces signifying some bygone era of medicine that brought intrusive thoughts of lobotomies and botched procedures. The smell also changed drastically. The clean halls with barely a speck of dust on the handrails shifted to a musky smell that can only be defined as old. After fully engulfing yourself in the old building, it seemed a completely different atmosphere. The cleanliness and brightly painted corridors gave way to gray, washed-out monotone that pulled the surrounding color out like an evil sponge. Now, the walk to the old hospital was the easy part, as the only way to the storage area was a single elevator that seemed to be the progenitor of all elevators. Like this was the test build, and all other elevators existed only due to this one's sacrifice. Its doors only open slowly after the worn popped-out button is pressed. It only has access to a few floors: the basement storage, the boiler rooms, and where I stood, the laundry room. That night, I pressed the button. Its familiar click followed by a shuddering and grind that made me think the elevator finally died, and I had witnessed its death throes. The doors creak open and reveal a broken floor, cracked and repaired more times than seemed possible, and a new smell, one of old oil and thinning elevator cables. I stepped in, and my weight noticeably shifted the elevator down, causing it to not sit even with the floor. This has happened to me hundreds of times, but each is still as jarring as the last. I pressed the basement button, waiting for the doors to close. The ride was to be expected, bumpy and terrifying, each tug on the antiquated cables seemingly their last, as I slowly descended into the old basement. A burning kind of smell, like that of an engine with no oil, filled the air. According to the maintenance crew, this was normal. I held my breath, taking comfort in only falling a single floor from the boiler room if it happened. The doors shuttered, slowly opened, revealing a large room filled with all manner and sizes of boxes. A metal receiving door sat unused, taking up most of the left wall. My steps felt somehow more difficult on the concrete floor, as if something was weighing me down as I walked past the storage room door. I made my way over, ignoring the surroundings, lost in my list of required items. I fumbled for my keycard, which hung around my neck with my name and picture that updates the computer system when I access a door. My keycard was the size of an average credit card, sometimes unwieldy around my neck, but at least it was impossible to lose. I swiped and waited for the green light and the beep that accompanied the door unlocking. I pulled at the metal handle, a little more forceful than most doors as it always seemed wedged closed. The heavy metal door gave way to a much larger room filled with shelves that kept our equipment organized. I began to verify the items on the list, loading up a cart so the morning crew would have their necessary items for the day. Each printer, every keyboard, and small component placed on the large cart echoed in the room. I had just moved a particularly heavy item, a large printer, on the bottom of the cart, when a noise sounded, one that I didn't expect. The beep of the door being unlocked, accompanied by the click the lock makes when it's released. I stared at the door, letting my imagination get the better of me. There should be no one with access to that room in the hospital, and I'd seen way too many horror movies to not immediately think about another exit. But the storage area only had one. I lowered myself behind the cart, focusing on the door, watching and patiently waiting. Nothing. The lock slid back into place, and the door's lights went red. I thought to myself it could be a glitch or some malfunction, and I made a note to message the security guys in the morning to check. They can easily see who accessed a door from the keycard they have. It logs the name and employee number of the person who swiped. I finished loading the materials needed, then headed toward the door at the other end of the room. I opened the heavy metal door and closed it behind me, ensuring it was locked. My first step toward the elevator was interrupted by a sound coming from deeper in the basement. We had no need to go that far in, as all that was back that way were old ramps and walkways that led nowhere now due to renovations. They were locked and could be used as an exit in case of a fire. I stopped and listened intently, trying to stifle my breathing long enough to hear. I heard a faint tapping, like a knock of someone who really isn't that interested in getting the attention of anyone in particular. This accompanied by the distant sound of footsteps. In any other part of the building, I normally wouldn't think anything of it, but no one came down here, ever. Even the maintenance workers had no reason, as all the pipes were moved to facilitate the new building. I considered calling out, but those scary movies crept up in the back of my mind, and I decided to head upstairs to check with the security team. The cameras would be able to see better than I could in any case. I walked quickly to the elevator, almost sprinting at the final few steps, and I waited for the doors to open. The terrifying mode of transportation seemed almost comforting as I jumped into its dilapidated confines. I knew pressing the button over and over would not make the doors close any faster, or the elevator spring to life more quickly, but it didn't stop my shaking hand from repeatedly slamming the antiquated letter. The doors finally closed, but not before I noticed a figure hunched over, staring at me from the shadows. The gargoyle-like posture lent something otherworldly to their presence. I watched the room shrink to nothing, searing the sight of that thing in the darkness into my memory as the elevator moved away from that floor. I waited, breathing heavily, at the wooden paneled doors. I kept pressing L to try and will the lift to get to laundry even a moment faster. My phone didn't work in the elevator, and even if I were outside, I had terrible reception in the old building. I moved slowly up, seeing the light leave the B2 button and bounce to B1, the old boiler room. An unexpected jolt stopped the elevator with the B1 button blinking slowly. I had not pressed B1. I was sure of it. It was impossible, as I was so focused on the panel there would be no way I could have made that mistake. Much to my dismay, however, those doors slid open with a loud metallic grind. The boiler room floor was still part of the basement and could be reached via the corridors, so I felt every inch of the slow crawl the doors made to their open position. Then I stared into the darkness of the old boiler room, slamming the paint off the laundry room button. I watched every silhouette in that room, the only light source pushing back against the darkness being the elevator I was in. My imagination ran wild, filling my thoughts with serial killers and dark beings only found on the pages of novels and in film. The doors never seemed to close so slowly before, grating the rusted metal and causing my anxiety to grow with every inch. The doors began to close, but somehow the darkness itself began to seep in. It overtook my small light, first at each side, then invading the ceiling. I could only watch in horror as the shadows seemed to come for me. Finally, the doors closed. My savior, an elevator built while my grandfather was still in diapers. I sighed and took a few steps back as the light bounced from B1 to L, signifying that my journey into the abyss was nearly over. Eventually, the doors opened to the well-lit laundry room full of machines working dutifully on bedsheets and articles of clothing. Though it was something I saw almost every day, I was swept over with relief. Quickly, I walked out of the elevator and turned toward the new building. As I walked, I thought perhaps what I saw had been a trick of my mind, a simple shadow brought to life by too many movies and novels. After dropping the equipment back into the department, I waited for my shift to end, checking for issues and ensuring everything was set up for the next day. A few minutes prior to my shift ending, an alert was sent over the intercom. Code open, bellowed across my department. I'd never heard that code before, so I checked the employee guide on our nearest computer. I skimmed the listing down the page until I got to the code open. It read, "Overly aggressive or violent patient. Contact the security team immediately." I spun my chair toward the phone and picked up the receiver. I knew the night security guard pretty well, as we'd pass in the hallways sometimes, making small talk every now and then. I dialed the number and waited for the click at the other end. When he answered, it wasn't his normal spiel, saying his name and department, but an almost panicked, "Hello?" I asked if he knew what was going on and why the alert had been called. He told me a patient had escaped unnoticed from the emergency room a few hours earlier. A special guard had been called in and assigned to him, but he had attacked the guard, severely injuring him and taking all his gear. They called in the police because now he had a taser, pepper spray, and various other items. My thoughts shifted to who it might be. I knew the day shift guys, and as if he was reading my mind, he said it was Jim, as he was the only one who answered his phone that night. Jim was a tough guy, ex-army, but getting up in age. Maybe that's why he had difficulty handling that patient. Apparently, poor Jim had been injured and knocked out, forced into the bed, and strapped down with a blanket over him. He was there for hours. If the nurse in the morning didn't notice a missing guard in the corner of the room, it may have been quite some time until they actually found him. He explained the missing man was an animal, but came in semi-sedated. He had self-medicated to the point of delirium, and the police were supposed to pick him up, but were called away due to some pileup on a freeway. "Hey, no worries. He's probably long gone by now," the shaky voice said on the other end of the receiver, seemingly trying to reassure himself more than me. I was about to let him go when I remembered my note. "Hey, can you tell me who accessed the door on B2 a little bit ago? It clicked open, but no one came in." I folded the note and threw it in the garbage. His anxious voice cracked. "I need to go now." The panic rose in his voice as he spoke. "Says here, it was Jim." Some dementia patients can be terrifying. From K-Anon. When I was in my first few years of college, I had great interest in working with the elderly. I'd always connected with older generations more than my own. I appreciated the history they lived through and the stories they had to share about it, even if I got one that was a little too eccentric about certain historical events. Many of them had such valuable things to say, and mostly no one other than the family they had left to share it with. It was no surprise I ended up in an assisted living facility for a summer job. I enjoyed assisted livings because I could still see the patients live their lives while giving them the care they needed. Some were able to shower and toilet themselves alone, others weren't. And when they weren't, I was there to provide care and dignity to their struggles. The only things that were unfortunate about the job were the hours and the ratio of residents to employees. On any given shift, I would have a 10-to-1 resident to employee ratio, and I was working second shift. So with half my ratio being in wheelchairs and the other half being frail or needing memory care, I had my hands full 24/7. This, of course, makes it difficult to connect with residents, the main reason why I wanted this summer job. Nonetheless, I found time for my residents and ways to build relationships with them. But we all know that this story isn't going to be rainbows and butterflies. I'd been working there for a little over 3 months and was working so hard to build a relationship with a memory care resident. His dementia had made him a shell of the man he used to be, or at least that's what I was told by the family when they came to visit. He was extremely quiet and only seldom spoke words to employees that he seemed to take to. His name was Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones was under my care most of the time I was on duty. He had begun to warm up to me slowly but surely through the 3 months I'd been working there. He was able to toilet and shower himself, but he needed reminders due to his dementia. Across the hall from Mr. Jones lived a man by the name of Mr. Owens. Mr. Owens was also a memory care resident, but his dementia varied greatly from Mr. Jones's. He had something called Lewy body dementia, which combined with his PTSD from serving in Korea, made him quite the caseload. He was notorious for getting combative when he had episodes, and would often mistake us employees for other people. He had never struck me, but he had struck others. Me and Mr. Owens had only had several vocal altercations, all of which were centered around him going into other residents' rooms. That was an absolute no-no. Though our residents maintained their autonomy for the most part within our facility, we were still held accountable for their actions, especially if it involved them and another resident. I often caught Mr. Owens in others' rooms at night as he was sundowning. You might know what this is if you saw the awful horror movie from 2015 called The Visit. It sucked. However, sundowning is what can often happen to dementia patients when the sun goes down. It refers to erratic and aggressive behaviors toward the late afternoon and nighttime, and often also includes pacing and anxiety as well. Mr. Owens did this very often, and on his sundowning journeys, he'd often wander into another patient's room and either wake them from their slumber in a panicked state because someone is in their freaking room, or he'd rummage through their belongings, which is also a major no-no for obvious reasons. On the particular night this story occurred, I was helping Mr. Jones get ready for bed. I was aiding him in remembering to change into his pajamas, brush his teeth, and take his nighttime medications. I sat with him for a moment after he crawled into his bed, and he looked at me with kind eyes. He said, "Thank you, my dear." I was so overcome with emotion, knowing that this gentle old soul trusted me enough to speak to me, and I replied, "You're always welcome, Mr. Jones. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow afternoon," with a warm smile on my face. He told me he wasn't ready for bed just yet, and still had much to do tonight. With an okay, I took off to begin my cleanings for the night. This was around 8:30 to 9 o'clock. After sharing with my coworker the pride I took in knowing Mr. Jones trusted me, I completed all my cleanings with the wind of the healthcare gods under my wings. I felt as if I was truly excelling as a nurse aide. That was until bed check. I made my way down my wing of the building, gently knocking on doors as to not wake the residents. But if they were up and doing private business, if you understand what I'm saying, I wouldn't invade their privacy. I only had one resident still awake, and that was Mr. Owens. I had knocked and opened the door to check his room to hear him in the shower. I figured I would finish the rest of the hall and circled back to check on him after a little bit of time passed. The next resident to check was Mr. Jones. After knocking, I entered his room and saw his silhouette lay on its side facing away from me, barely lit up by the milky moonlight. I saw his shoulder rise and fall ever so softly. I smiled and turned to leave the room when I heard a drip, drip, drip from the bathroom. Odd, I remarked to myself. I don't remember that dripping sound from earlier, and I'm sure he'd turned the faucet off after brushing his teeth. I pulled out my phone and planned to use its flashlight to illuminate the bathroom instead of turning the light on and possibly waking Mr. Jones. Upon turning on the flashlight and lighting up the small room, I saw crimson. There was blood everywhere. It coated the tile in thick pools. Chunks of sinew and skin were mixed into the blood on the tile. I recoiled in horror. What the hell happened here? I moved my phone up as I pulled my hands to my face in terror, and in doing so, I illuminated the sink and medicine cabinet. Hanging from the medicine cabinet were strips of skin, red with blood and torn as though they weren't removed neatly. I panicked. I radioed my coworker on the walkie-talkie to call the police and an ambulance, and I made my way to Mr. Jones's bedside. He'd been skinned. Strips of his chest, legs, arms, and face were gone. They'd been removed from him like a freaking animal that had been hunted. I stayed with him until emergency services arrived. I watched him be wheeled off, then turned and began to micromanage my wing of residents, as they were all in a panic now upon hearing the ambulance come. I went room to room to check on them, ensuring their safety and that whoever did this to Mr. Jones didn't harm anyone else. Upon getting to Mr. Owens' room, I knocked and entered. I could see the light coming from under his bathroom door. I knocked and asserted myself, saying I was coming in to check his safety, but I wish I had never opened that door. Mr. Owens was squeaky clean, standing in front of the mirror, humming an old tune and shaving his face. But the bathroom, oh God, the bathroom. It was covered in towels and red blood. It looked like a triage room in the ER after a gunshot victim had entered. I looked around, taking it all in. Life felt like slow motion. When we locked eyes, he winked at me. I was at a total loss for words. I babbled and stuttered, trying to get away from the man as fast as I could. I ran to the hallway and locked the man in his room. I heard him behind me as I ran out. He wasn't running. He was just slowly walking to the door separating us. I saw him try the doorknob. It's like he knew I was watching. After he tried it a few times to no avail, I heard him say,
"What? Nothing to say? That's okay. The quiet ones make better victims anyhow."
Needless to say, I quit that job, and I stayed as far away from dementia residents as possible. Mr. Jones died from his injuries. And Mr. Owens? That worthless prick is doing life in a facility, locked far, far away from the quiet ones he so desired. An active morning from Amy. This story takes place in a grocery store, which we already knew was haunted. To be fair, the entire island we were on was known to be haunted, so small paranormal things happened every so often. At the time, I worked at a small mom-and-pop grocery store as a cashier. It was the only one on that end of the island. You could see most of the store from the register and down specific aisles depending on which register you were at. There were 4 aisles that had another aisle which cut through them halfway down. Working here, everyone had long since gotten used to tugs on our clothes, things usually falling off the shelves on aisle 1, which is where the least amount of breakable things were, among other things. There was that morning where a glass jar of hot chocolate mix fell from a top shelf and shattered without a noise, and that did have us scratching our heads. We'd long since believed that the ghost in the store was the previous owner who was the father of the current owner. He was referred to as Red, and usually blamed for most of the incidents. I happened to be the opening manager one morning when the activity ramped up for no reason that I was aware of. I arrived about half an hour before opening, and I knew I would be alone since my coworker B never showed up until her exact clock-in time, which would be 7 in the morning. So I opened up the door, locked it behind me, and I turned off the alarm. The store always had a few lights left on just so we weren't completely in the dark, and we usually kept it on that partial lighting until 5 minutes to open. I started going about my morning tasks, first thing being to grab the newspapers and count them. I headed over to the second entrance to the store, opening that door to grab everything. I put the newspapers on top of the carts, and as I started counting them, I noticed I could hear footsteps. Directly in front of me was a lattice that acted like a wall to separate where the carts were from the rest of the store. Our soda machine was on a counter directly on the other side, and it was the beginning of aisle 1 as well. I could very distinctly hear footsteps on the aisle, even though I was the only person in the store. I popped my head around the corner, just to be sure, and there was nothing there. I shrugged, assuming it was just the usual ghostly antics, and I kept counting newspapers. The footsteps kept coming back, though, following me up to the registers where I had to confirm the lotto ticket numbers. They kept walking in front of the registers, and even the plastic bags began to rustle. This made me a bit more nervous, since I had to have my back to the rest of the store while I did these numbers. As I finished up, I decided to turn the lights on early, hoping that might quiet things down a little. I had to walk past all the aisles to reach the back room where the light box was. Aisles 1 and 2 were normal, but I jumped as I passed aisle 3, because standing halfway down at the cross aisle was a tall black humanoid mass. It stood probably about 6 feet tall. I picked up my pace, wanting to just return to the front of the store, but knowing I had to turn the lights on still. I had to go down aisle 4 and past the cross aisle where I'd just seen the entity. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I ran past that part, and I ducked behind the freezers where the light box was, and I turned everything on. Then I had to go past that section again. This time I did look, but I saw nothing there. I made a detour to grab the tills for the registers, and as I was putting them in the tills, the footsteps and bag rustling started up again. As soon as I was done with that, I pretty much refused to do anything else, and I just stood with my back against the counter, listening to the footsteps throughout the store. There was one last scare in the store for me, though. Earlier than expected, there was a loud knocking on the window behind me, which nearly made me jump out of my skin. I'd never been so relieved to see my coworker before. As soon as she came in, everything else quieted down. But I did tell the rest of my coworkers about it. It's the only time any of us had ever seen an apparition in the store. Afterwards, I never had a morning like that again. It just went back to the usual clothes tugging and cups falling off of shelves on aisle 1. But I can tell you one thing, I'll never forget seeing that shadowy mass on aisle 3. Level B2 from K. Just as some background, I worked in digital marketing, but the COVID pandemic hit pretty hard in my country. I got laid off due to my old company being shut down. So for a year now, I took the trade of my father and became a full-time plumber. The job is fine, I get to work on my own time and the bills are paid. There has not been that many downsides, well, not until this particular day that I'm about to share with you. I got a call from a small company on the edge of town. They needed a toilet to be unclogged, and they needed it fixed fast. I wasn't doing anything that day, so I got my tools and drove out there. It was at an old building surrounded by fancy new ones. I'd been there before, but that was years ago. I could have sworn they had demolished this building to make way for a new modern office block, but I guess they hadn't yet. The plumbing might not be in the best shape, I thought to myself. I drove into the parking lot. It was an opening that led to an opening that goes down maybe a floor or two into the basement of the building. As I entered the lot, there was a boy there. He couldn't have been older than half my age. He took a look at my car and told me to pay a small fee for the parking. I asked him, "Where's the parking barrier?" He told me it was being maintained, so he'll be collecting the parking fee. "Sure," I said. I didn't want to argue as I was almost late for the job, so I reluctantly paid the boy, and he then handed me what looked to be a used parking card, usually to indicate someone had paid for the parking fee. To be honest, it was sketchy at best, but these are the things you have to deal with in this part of town. He then told me to immediately take a left from here and find parking at the back, as he pointed straight down a long line of cars. Again, I'd been there before, and the building I'm supposed to be at, Block C, is just behind him on the right. So I had to ignore his instructions. I took a sharp turn and sped through the parking lot towards C Block. I heard him yelling, trying to stop me. It didn't take me long to find a parking spot. I was lucky enough to find one really close to the elevator. There were people coming in and out of the building, understandably so, as it was nearing the end of a working day. I took out my 2 toolboxes and headed to the elevator. As I pushed the button to go up to the 4th floor, I quickly noted my surroundings, and I double-checked my location to be sure. It was C Block, parking spot number 186, floor B2. The parking lot had yellow pillars. All right, got it, I thought. That's easy to remember. Long story short, I came and I did my job. Turns out it was just clumps of toilet paper stuck inside the pipes. I cleared the blockage, and the guy actually gave me a pretty big tip. We had a small chat, and I hurried back to the toilet to pack my things as I didn't want to get stuck in traffic. My house was at the other side of town after all. As I was packing up my tools, I looked at my watch. It was 7 p.m. I thought to myself, yeah, great, just in time for dinner. I carried my toolboxes with both hands and headed back to level B2. When I got there, there were still plenty of parked cars, but mine wasn't there. I looked around, thinking another car may have blocked it from my view, or it was at the other side of the elevator exit. But it wasn't. I scoured the area looking for it several times. I sighed and wondered if I went off on the wrong floor, so I went to the floor above me, B1. To my surprise, that floor was even worse. It definitely was not where I'd parked my car. It didn't even look like the same building. Then I remembered the parking spot number, 186. I came back down and tried to relocate my car that way. As the elevator opened, I could already see the numbers on the floor, indicating the parking spot numbers. The last spot, right at the edge, was number 180. So I checked the spot next to it, 179, 178, 177. The number just kept getting smaller and smaller, so it couldn't be along that row, right? I felt really tired, and I didn't feel like walking to find out, so I went back up to the 4th floor to try and retrace my steps. I went back to the office and walked back to the elevator with my toolboxes still in my hands. Everything was the same as when I arrived, only now the sun was slowly making its way down for nightfall. There seemed to be fewer and fewer people as time passed. Again at the elevator I pressed B2, and this time, the parking lot looked like level B1 from previously. The pillars were gray and there seemed to be fewer cars. I walked around the area to find my car, desperately trying to activate the alarm from my remote, but nothing happened. My car's alarm didn't go off. This was unusual because usually if the alarm was triggered, I could hear it blaring from pretty far away. I looked at my watch again. It was 7:15 p.m. I thought I was going crazy because it couldn't have been that short of a time that passed. At this point, cars were driving past me left and right as office hours ended a while ago. Pretty soon the parking lot was empty, save for a few dusty cars that looked like they had been abandoned. Thinking I must have entered the wrong block, I walked all the way to the end of the parking lot, only to find a dead end. Just a wall of concrete. At this point, I'd given up looking for my car, and I figured I would just find the exit and come back for my car tomorrow. The exit signs were everywhere, but the more I followed the signs, the more confused I got. I kept going in circles, and I always ended up back at the elevator. So I came back to the ground floor, and there was a small desk with a security guard on his phone. I asked him, "Is this C block?" He said, "Yep, this is C block." Then I asked, "Is there any elevator I can use to get to level B2? He replied, "No, there is only this elevator for this block." He seemed disinterested to assist me, but that's probably the only information I needed. So I went down the same elevator again, this time first to level B1, just to make sure I'm not on the wrong floor. When the doors opened, I peeked out, and no, my car wasn't there, so I continued to B2. Now B2 was completely empty. There was nothing. Nobody in work clothes, no cars going out, just still air in a basement. Again? I asked myself. So yes, again, I walked around trying to find my car. I saw a sign that pointed me to Block D, and I decided to follow it, thinking maybe I parked it at the wrong block. I treaded carefully and set a few visual markers so I could retrace my steps. After maybe about 20 minutes, a few turns, and a few times catching my breath, I felt like I got to a part of the car park that hadn't seen a visitor in months. It was dusty, it was dark. I looked around and there I saw on the walls, C. I was still in C block. I checked my wristwatch, 7:20 p.m. I was about to lose my mind right there and right then. I dropped my toolboxes and ran to the elevator and got on the ground floor. I took a cab home and I slept in the cab. That was my day. The following day, I went back to the building. I went through the same reception counter, same elevator, the door opened, and there it was in plain sight. My car, just in front of the glass pane that you see as you exit the car park. The most unusual part? The toolboxes I left were right next to the car, on the driver's side door. I got in and I pulled out, vowing to never again step foot in this building. It's been a few weeks since then. I never knew what happened that day, nor do I ever want to find out. Invisible Employee from Vladimir. I'll start by saying I'm a skeptic. My mind runs through any logical explanation when something supernatural happens. I don't immediately believe stories or videos, even if I'm creeped out by them, and think, heck no. However, once my mind runs through everything and comes up empty, I'll admit, well, that's something for sure. I just don't know what. In 1907 through 1908, the property I work at opened as the first tuberculosis hospital in Kentucky. In 1940, when its more well-known sister hospital couldn't hold any more patients, the building I now work in was built to take them in. When the sister hospital finally closed, my work took the remaining patients. At some point, we became an institute for the mentally and physically disabled. When I began working as a housekeeper, I was on first shift. I heard many stories of ghosts, shadow figures, and strange creatures roaming outside and inside the building. The property has many structures once used to house nurses, doctors, and other staff during the tuberculosis outbreak, now used for other departments. These stories often came from the residents who died during the nursing home phase. However, I quickly learned the history of the institute, and many of the stories could be from either time period. To me, they were just that, stories to spook the new guy. Although deep down I wanted to experience one of those stories myself, since I also enjoyed ghost or supernatural stories, even if I barely believed in them. Eventually, I discovered that we once had a morgue within the building, which explains our one elevator that opens on both sides, leading to a back door. I was moved to third shift and forgot all about the stories I'd heard from first shift. Our cleaning carts have a distinct sound, so distinct that people would say, "Here comes housekeeping," half joking, half out of habit. I mention this because one night when I was alone, I heard a similar noise. I stopped stalking my cart and walked into the hall to see who from second was still there. But there was no one. 5 minutes went by, and I hear it again. I was thinking someone was playing a prank on me. I searched the housekeeping hall, but again I found no one. Either I'd gotten so used to my cart's unique voice or something else was making the noise. Finding no answer, I just went back to work. This sound went on for months without an explanation. Listening closely, though, I noticed it sounded like our carts, but not. There was a specific word that described what I was hearing, but I couldn't figure it out. It wasn't just me who heard it either. Anyone on third shift who needed to pass through our hallway heard it. We all just assumed it was the pipes. Everyone knows the old girl needed a makeover after all these years. With my luck, I ended up training a new employee mid to late 2017. I had her grab a chemical we had run out of as I started on a bathroom. When she still didn't come back after a while, I stepped out of the bathroom and looked down the hall, since housekeeping was just in view. She was just standing there, dazed. Bolting past the double doors, she returned to my side and managed to get out a quiet, "I don't know where it is." She